Welcome to the Money Over 50 podcast, brought to you by Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue from Money Over 50 Financial Advisors. This information is general in nature and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. Therefore, you should consider whether the information is appropriate for you and your personal circumstances. If you require personal advice, please contact Money Over 50 Financial Advisors. Here are your hosts, Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue.
Welcome to Money Over 50 with Dallas and Michael. Dallas, you can compare things, but you can't compare experiences.
That's correct. So this is one of my podcasts where it's a conceptual framework that I've picked up somewhere along the way, and I'm going to do my best at trying to explain it in a way that might make sense, and hopefully you'll chime in and it will resonate with you.
Yeah,
if not, it'll be a very short podcast. So this has been... There's a few things that made me think of this idea. I heard this on a book or a podcast somewhere the other day. Basically, a guy saying, we've talked a lot about how the evidence shows that spending money on experiences, on average, provides a better bang for your buck than spending money on possessions or material things. And we're sort of all, the research shows that. Anecdotally, most people know that in their own life. They've experienced buying a thing and then sort of the shine wears off and they're not that excited about it anymore, whereas they've spent money on experiences with people and doing things and they've always remembered that fondly. But I never really understood the reason behind why. And so the thing I read the other day, which I think makes a lot of sense, is the theory as to why that happens is because human beings are amazing comparison machines. So that's what we do, walk around all day comparing this versus that. And particularly in our own life. Like if you look at we're tribal animals, we all look around and go, what's everyone else doing? How do I stack up compared to everyone else? And where I've been really thinking about this lately is Nicola and I have been house hunting, as you know, which has been the bane of my existence because it's my least favourite job. But we've been house hunting throughout sort of leading up to the end of the year and then into January. And at the same time, I've been having lots of conversations with people about their end of year plans, And what I thought was really interesting is when you're talking about a house, it's very easy to compare. And what I mean by that is if you own a house, you can look at the guy down the street and go, well, our house is 3 bedrooms, his is 4 bedroom, and he's got this shed or he's got this, better street appeal, or he's got there's basically a checklist of things you could go through and go, who's better, who's worse, who's whatever. And so by its nature, that lends itself to us doing that. We look around and we go, right, well, I've got a nice house, it's very comfortable, it's all good, but the guy next door to me just put solar in his roof, and well, maybe I should have solar, and why don't I? And does he? And there's almost a subconscious status thing that goes on, which causes us, the whole point is it causes anxiety so that we go and relieve that by trying to make sure that we do fit into the hierarchy in a correct way. Whereas when you talk to people about their end of year plans, you go, right, what are you doing for Christmas? And people will either go, I'm going to visit my family here in Townsville, or I'm going to my cousin's place out in the middle of nowhere, or all of my family is going to Maggie Island, or I'm just going to stay home and not have to deal with anyone or anything, or I'm actually working and I'm getting quadruple time to work Christmas Day. Or every different person you talked about, that experience of how they spend their holidays, their Christmas, that sort of thing, you can't really rank them up. Like you can't go, oh yeah, that family going over to the island is better than my trip to Hughenden to see my family, or the person who's just staying home and relaxing and not having to deal with all the burden. Is that better or worse than the family that's hosting Christmas and probably is having fun, but it's more stressful? So the point there was that was a really concrete example for me of you can't really compare experiences. And the same thing happens with your holidays, where when someone says, oh yeah, I'm going to Thailand for a holiday, someone else says, oh, we're going down for a trip through the Barossa Valley. You don't know which ones. There is no better or worse. It becomes a thing where you can't compare yourself to other people. And by its nature, if you can't compare yourself to other people, you can't have the anxiety or the feeling of the fear of missing out or the stress of worrying of how do I stack up there, because it's incomparable. Does that at all resonate with you, Michael?
It does. It does.
Any thoughts to add? Anything?
Not really.
I feel like this could have
I've been sitting here thinking, what can I add to this? What can I add to this? Yeah.
No, I think I mean, you and I have talked a lot before on this podcast and off about anecdotally, we find a lot more joy out of spending money on experiences rather than things, and we sort of knew that, and we see that in our clients all the time. It's something you see again and again.
Yeah,
and again.
look. Well, I mean, one of the thoughts that I did have when you were when you were speaking there, I thought the comparison between an experience and a thing, for me, I'd much more get much more enjoyment out of experiences than things. So, we've just come back from New Zealand. Now that New Zealand trip was paid for by the car payments that I don't have to make in the last. Yeah. Well, I've actually put that money into superannuation, but you get the point. So rather than drive around in a new car, I'd way rather take my family to New Zealand for 2 weeks, which is what we've done. So, because we still talk about it now, we talk about the trips that we've had in the past, and we all had a great time. So it's look, it's hard to compare experience to experience. You can compare thing to thing. Yeah. But an interesting one for me is to say, okay, I'm going to compare this experience to not having this thing. Yeah. And for me, it's an easy one because we've spoken a lot about this on the podcast about driving cars that you fully own and inexpensive cars. So I'm comparing the experience that we had of 2 weeks as a family together, and compared to the hypothetical new car that I could be driving, which would mean that I wouldn't be able to afford that holiday.
It's funny you say that because Nicola and I have just been talking about this with the house thing, where because what I realise is that's probably not normal. The ability to take a sum of money and think I can either buy that thing or what's the income stream that I can turn that into, and what experiences can I buy with that? Like we're looking at this with housing, where I've said before there's this house versus this house. Now that costs an extra $300,000, and when I was saying things like, what if we took that money and invested it instead, and over the next 10 years we could draw 40-50 grand a year out of there and go on a big family holiday, and I could just see that it wasn't resonating with her because it was like apples and oranges. She's going, and then that led into, she's going, well, can we do that anyway? How does it? Look.
I was just having a thought there, and I've had this thought beforehand. I think society is guilty now of actually thinking they can do everything. Yeah. Like you see it. You see it everywhere. You see it not in just in younger people. It's in people that are approaching retirement as well, or people that have already retired. I think that is. I think people do think they can have an expensive house and they can have 2 cars under finance and they can still go on an annual expensive holiday. Now they can, but until they can't, until something has to give. So
that's the whole point. It's like for some people you can, you know what I mean? They could just do that, and that's. But I guess that it was an interesting example of one where it is a lot easier to compare product to product than product to experience, and in some ways it's not unknowable, but it's a trickier way to think of it. To go, right, you've got this house, or you've got so. I'll give you my workaround with this was that I turned that into. So what I said is basically we could either have this house that's worth 300 grand more, or we could have this other house that's not as nice, not as flash, but we've got 300 grand. We could go and buy a unit on Magnetic Island with that $300,000, which then confused the issue because Nicola then said, "So we're going to do that?" I said, "No, we're not going to do that." But conceptually, we could do that. But that actually sort of worked a bit better because she then. Like it at least was sort of the same language, which was like I've got either one house or I've got a house and a unit, and what does that then look like in my lifestyle? That's then flows into, right, well, we could take the kids over to Magnetic Island. Once again, we're going to plug the beauty of Magnetic Island, but you take the kids over the island every weekend. We could get really settled in there. You could go for a week every couple of months. You could that at least then got the conversation more around what does our day-to-day life look like, and what would the experience of our family life look like compared to going, that's a nicer nicer bathroom, or that's a bigger bedroom, or that's a whatever it is. So.
And for podcast listeners that haven't heard us rave about Magnetic Island in the past, so Magnetic Island is an island that's just 20-minute ferry ride from Townsville. So it's a very, very popular place to go. It's we think of it as paradise. It's 70% national parks. It's just fantastic. It's an island that's it's like a little city of its own. It has different suburbs and different bays and things like that where there's residential buildings and so forth. And so when we talk about Maggie Island, it's short for Magnetic Island, but it's just off the coast of Townsville.
Yeah, and that's it's a good, especially with, like, for us with little kids, it's a great easy holiday from here. And so it's that was a really interesting one where I then took it one step removed, which was to then make it more tangible. Was to go, right, well, if we don't necessarily need to spend the $300,000 on buying a unit on Maggie Island, because we've done the numbers on that a million times, and what we'd actually be better off doing is taking that $300,000 and investing it and drawing an income out of that to then pay rent on a unit over there for a week, but you can then at least try and stack it up. So there may well be, that's probably a whole other podcast about how to compare the thing that you're going to buy, and alternatively, what experiences would you be able to get from that. But I just thought it was an interesting.
And look, it's one of those things that people don't often think about. They think, do we buy
buy this or buy this?
A $1.3 million house, or do we buy $1 million house? What can we get for $1 million? It's neither or.
Yeah.
They don't often think, okay, well, if we took the $1 million house instead of the $1.3 million house, that extra $300,000 could be put into an account. Whichever way you slice it up, it's lower repayments. With those lower repayments, we could put that money towards funding holidays during the year, or travel, or spending time with the kids or grandkids or whatever.
Yeah, perfect. See, I think you've done a great job here of taking my conceptual, theoretical idea and going, what's an action item from this?
It took a while. It did take a while. I was sitting there going, I don't know where he's going with this, and I don't know what I can add to this. And
well, I just thought it was an interesting one to go for a start of, like, the why behind when we say to people, and because you've seen it and I've seen it in our own lives and in clients' lives again and again and again. People go to buy a thing, and then think this will make me substantially more happy. But it never ends, because even if you do buy the bigger flasher house, someone 3 streets over buys a bigger flasher house, or they buy it in a nicer suburb, or whatever it is. There's always a way to compare yourself, and that's, other than to meditate for 6 hours a day and reach full enlightenment. I think that the only way to get off that roller coaster is just not to get on in the first place. Well, I'm not going to play the game of buying things and then comparing them and having that subconsciously playing on my mind. I'm just going to go, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to think about what's the experiences that I want to have with my family and with my friends, and how do I live a life that's really full of those things. That then it doesn't matter if I go, okay, well, I don't have the car that my next door neighbour's got, but that's okay because we just had a great trip to New Zealand for 2 weeks, for example. So there you go. Nice way to make it tangible and bring it back from the mists of the theoretical world that I like to live in, Michael. So thanks for that.
Thank you for listening to the Money Over 50 podcast with Money Over 50 Financial Advisors. For more information and resources, visit the Money Over 50 website, mo50.com.au. We look forward to catching up again soon.